Howdy BHRCers. You can find every episode of Why People on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcast content. On this episode number 27, we have Debra Vasques Bruneau, the EVP HR at JSR Life Sciences with us. Debra is a longtime BHRCer, one of our favorite HR executives in the Northeast, and we are excited to hear about her entire career journey.
Hello. It's nice to be here with you both. Happy Friday.
Thank you, Debra. For those folks listening for the first time, the Why People podcast is a BHRC production. The Boston HR Council is one of the largest HR executive communities in the world with just under 1,500 HR executives. And the Why People podcast comes on twice a month, the 1st and the 15th. I will introduce co-founder of the BHRC and co-host of Why People, Paul Roberts.
Thank you, Sean. Good day to everyone. I'm elated for today's guest, one of our favorite BHRCers, as you said. Should be a great one.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. And very excited to now formally introduce Debra Vasques Bruneau, the Executive Vice President of HR at JSR Life Sciences. Debra, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited. And Debra, we were chatting before we started recording, has seen a few of these podcasts, so knows kind of how the cadence goes. But everyone's story is so different. It makes for such a fun conversation. So Debra, we'll start with asking you if you could kind of, bring us back, start wherever you want, but, help us get grounded in a little bit about who Debra is.
Sure. I'd be happy to. I will not go all the way back to the cradle, but something that's really important to me and really defines who I am as a person, as a professional, as a mom, and sort of speaks to many of the things I care about in life, but also in the HR industry. I am a first-generation American. My parents are from Portugal, and that is really important for me as an identity, as a label. I'm very proud of that. I learned a lot about courage and bravery and what it means to really put yourself in vulnerable situations from my grandmother, who came here a widower, 6 children, with just the clothes on their backs and 1 suitcase. I actually have the picture on my desk, and under it says courage, strength, and love. And it reminds me every day when things get really hard. I remember her journey and my mom's journey and her siblings' journey here. My dad came shortly thereafter, and they've been in the United States for over 60 years. But I grew up in a very bicultural home. My friends tease me because there are things that you do as an American child that I didn't experience, like sleepovers, as an example, or camp. Those are things that were very foreign to me. And so the reason I think this is important to share is, A, it's clearly about who I am as a person and the values that I have as a human being. But also working for global organizations, I feel like it gives me a sense of purpose and understanding when I engage with other cultures and other people, because I know that my experiences are different than others. And we don't see the world the same way, even when we come from the same country, as an example. Went on to get my degree in political science at Merrimack College. Go Warriors, happy graduation. Actually, I wanted to be on Broadway. I wanted to continue performing. I've performed my whole life, so I sing and I've done musical theater. But being a child of immigrant parents, education is incredibly important to them. It was not something, the opportunities, they did not have those opportunities. And so it was incredibly important for them that I continued my education. And so declined the acceptance letter to go to the American Academy of Musical Dramatic Arts in New York City. For those of you that are old enough, you would know it as Fame. It was a TV show that I loved growing up. In fact, I thought every day you should be able to stand up on your desk and break into song. That's how you should be able to express yourself. That doesn't happen. I'm still waiting for it, but it doesn't happen. So went on to get my degree, worked in higher education. I was very, very blessed to work at both Harvard University and Brown University, and really just worked hard to learn development, advancement, alumni relations, admissions, I was liaison to the president's office, worked with the board. It was just such an incredible experience. I had no idea what I was doing. And again, this is so important because oftentimes in my career, I've been thrown in the deep end. And what I believe my family has given me is the ability to fight and to learn and to grow and to be gritty. And that has how I would describe my career. I remember in one of my first corporate roles, my boss, who ended up being probably one of my favorite managers, great mentor, still is, great friend. I sang at her wedding. She pulled me out of orientation day one and said, Debra, we're doing an acquisition. I need you to get on the phone with the attorneys. And I said, but I've never done one before. She said, I guess today's the day you learn. And since then, I've done many mergers and acquisitions, created playbooks, and I never would have thought back then that I would have had any idea how to figure it out. I'm a very curious person, and I think learning is something that all leaders need to embrace, embody forever. You know, I mean, that's just who I am as a person. I'm constantly reading and thinking about our industry. Went into the corporate world. I like to say I'm industry agnostic, spent time in lots of different industries. Most of my career has been in either higher education or life sciences. The stints in between were smaller, is what I mean. I've been in HR for over 20 years, mostly in global roles for Fortune 500, Fortune 200 companies. And so that's a little bit about me. Oh, I should probably mention my children. Sorry. I have an amazing family. I have 7 children. I'm very blessed. I have 2 that are mine, and my husband has 5. So I am lucky to have 5 bonus children, and they are fabulous. So we have 3 graduating in the next 2 weeks.
That's awesome, Debra. And I knew some of that information, but it's always so cool to hear the story again, and can a lot of what you shared kind of. It kind of comes off you just in everyday conversation, that kind of energy. So it's really cool.
And Sean, I think we found our future BHRC musical act. I'm excited.
And a duet. I'd imagine Debra would probably put us to work as well. We'd probably.
So you can be the backup dancer.
But so Debra, this is really cool. And a question we kind of ask always, at this kind of early on part of the story is, and I'll be fascinated to hear your answer here because of the higher ed component to some of your early work. At what point did you actually know about like what a human resources function, like what that actually was within an organization? At what point did you know?
That's a great question. And I'd say it's one that I'm still evolving, right? But I would say when I was at Harvard, so I've been in HR my whole career, even though I was in higher education. But when I was at Harvard, very young in my career, my 20s, my first job out of school, I thought HR was benefits and payroll, right? The back office. So back in the day, we had typewriters and carbon copy paper. I'm dating myself. But I didn't realize there was this strategic business partner, which is where I've spent the majority of my career, ironically enough. It was during those conversations. And again, I had a great leader. I was having conversations with team members, and he took a chance on me. He said, Debra, you need to go into HR. And I remember being insulted. I was like, what? Why would I go into HR? And he said, because what you're doing is HR. I said, no, it's not. I'm sharing with you information on how I think we can strengthen our employees and how it would benefit the organization. That's business talk. And he said, Debra, that's HR talk. He said, I think you need to go talk to our HR business partner, Karen. And I said, what is an HR business partner? And I loved Karen. Talk about a great role model. She was a mom, and just this very high energy, wonderful role model. And so I did. I shadowed her. I asked questions. I volunteered for committees. So we had unions. They still have unions in higher education, which people don't realize. I volunteered to sit on committees and boards to really understand the behind the scenes of HR and all the pieces of it. So I was doing, in higher education, they usually call it like an administrative role. So I was doing finance and HR. So it's at that time, I mean, I was very lucky. Like I said, it was, 4 or 5 years in, where I started doing more and more with these sort of strategic business partner. But I didn't know. To me, it was counseling. It was advising people and helping bridge. I see a gap over here and a need over here. Let me share that in a way, since I have the voice and the ears of the people and my business leader. Let me just marry those things. I didn't know that's what HR was. And so once I discovered that there was this whole strategic element very aligned to the business, I was all in. I was all in, and I haven't looked back.
It's fascinating for a couple of different reasons, Deborah. Like, I guess first off, ever since I've gotten the chance to know you, 3+ years ago, almost 4 years ago now, we've never actually talked HR, in this siloed way, right? We usually, aside from kids and dancing and stuff like that, we talk about the business and what's going on and what some of the challenges are and some opportunities. So I'm curious, at Harvard, was that strategic business conversation presented to you, or was that just always how you thought about conversation?
It was the latter. No one said, "Hey, Deborah, go do this." I was doing a lot of different functions. Like I said, I was running the annual fund program. I was doing events for Latin American presidents, liaison to the president. We were doing a lot of different things in finance. And it was just because I had this ability to talk to people and really listen to what was happening. But also I was in these conversations with our executive director and able to just sort of piece those things together. So it was really, no one asked me to do that. It's just, I thought it was helpful. So I just brought it forward.
Yeah. That's really cool. And I have to ask, her name really is Karen, right?
Yes, I was thinking that as I said it out loud. I was like, yes, it was Karen. Hello, Karen, you're still out there.
Before we kind of move on, Deb, to talk about, from your early kind of life and career and how the progression started happening, could we spend, maybe a few minutes talking a little bit more about how your background, your family, immigrant parents, how that shows up in your work and shows up, like I said, I can feel it in conversation, but would love to hear a little bit about how it informs some of what you do and how you think about things.
Sure. So I grew up with opportunity. I want to sort of put that out there. But knowing what my family had in Portugal, or actually didn't have in Portugal, my mom went to the restroom in an outhouse. They washed their clothes on the river, using rock, and they didn't have running water. And my mom's family was very poor. They lived on a farm. They, milked goats, which didn't know you could do. So having that understanding of what it takes to then bring your family here and build a different life, to me, I believe it has given me an ability to think about other people's privilege or lack thereof. I have empathy. I have great empathy. And again, understanding cultures and helping to bridge those conversations. I speak Portuguese and I speak Spanish. And that's because I feel like it's really important for me to, when I go to another country, even today, when we visit other sites, I try to learn a little bit of the language because I feel like that's important. I want to understand who you are as a person. And I believe that comes from, how I was brought up and being very grateful. My parents would always say, we might not have a lot, but we have a lot of love. And that's important. And I was constantly surrounded by community. So in the Portuguese community, family became more than just the people you were related to. So I have a lot of people, and my kids always joke about this, that I call Auntie Carol, or Uncle Mario, and they're not related to me. But in the Portuguese community, you are family. Community is family. And so understanding that, I believe, really filters into, the DE&I space, but also just working in global organizations when, as an example, you're doing, we do so much on Zoom or webinar, as we used to call them. Speak slowly. Understand that English is not everyone's first language, even if you've lived here 50 years, right? My parents still have a very heavy accent And now that they're retired, English comes a lot more slowly for them. And we joke at home, they speak in both languages. And my husband will be like, wait, how did you know? I was like, oh, it's half English, half Portuguese. That's just normal. Right. And so it allows me to also help others lean in and understand that there are differences and that we have different values as human beings, but also from a cultural standpoint. So when you're introducing benefits, when you're introducing different programs, learning opportunities, how we teach and train employees, how you as a manager embrace being in a global role, helping those managers understand what it means to lead people maybe in a country you're not familiar with. And so I feel like that really comes in as who I am as a person, who I am as a coach, who I am as just a business leader.
Thanks for kind of helping us understand that even more, Debra. I thought it was great when you opened around that, but it's neat to hear how it shows up every day for you. Well, okay, great job kind of bringing us up to Harvard and Brown. Excited to hear about the bridge over into I don't want to say leadership roles. So it seems like you were doing a lot of leading there, but maybe into corporate America or. Sure. Yeah. Interesting to hear how you'll phrase it, Debra, but let's hear a little bit about that bridge.
Sure. So it's interesting because many people, when they hear higher education, they think, oh, you get the summers off and, it must be so much slow. Like the pace must be so much slower there. It's not, especially where I was on what's called the sales side of the organization, right? I mean, you both know you're very active at Nichols College. We raise money. And so without raising money, there are no teachers or fellowships or buildings or even hockey coaches or whatever, So I always had that sort of corporate side. And the reason I left higher education is, quite honestly, it didn't move fast enough for me. It was very bureaucratic and I wanted to go faster. I wanted to have more of an impact. I wanted to do more and grow faster. And it is you go from an HR1 to an HR2 to an HR, which is fine, just wasn't fine for me. So I went into corporate America, and as I said, in different industries, and I just asked for more. When I saw opportunities, I'd raise my hand, even if I was scared to death and had no idea how I was going to do it or what I was going to do. In fact, when I was at AT Cross, my first real global role, like I had global responsibility at Harvard and Brown because I worked in the Latin American studies and worked, as I said, with Latin American presidents and Latin American fellows. But I had no exposure to APAC at this point, none. And as I said, at this point, I think I'm in my early 30s. I went to AT Cross and it was my first global role, my first exposure to Hong Kong. I had no idea. I didn't understand the culture. I didn't know not that I didn't understand. I just had no exposure to it. So, and at that time, remember, the internet isn't as pervasive, right? Again, I know I'm dating myself, but it's true. So I went to bookstores, I read, I talked to people, I asked my staff. I was okay with saying, could you please help me understand? Because I don't want to insult you. I don't want to do something that might come off as rude or offensive. So please help me understand. Are there things that I should be aware of? Again, I'm in my 30s and I don't know where that came from, you guys. Like I have no idea. I felt like I need to be honest. And that stuck with me for my whole career. And you both have heard me talk about authenticity and how important it is to me as a person and how much I value that in other leaders. It is okay to say you don't know something. It is okay to be vulnerable and ask for help. I have seen way too many leaders not do that, and it's to their own demise, if you will. And so I was able to take on leadership roles by just asking and volunteering and really putting myself in really uncomfortable situations. But I did the work. I didn't just come home and put my feet up. Whenever I had spare time after putting my kids to bed, I would spend time on the internet reading, or I would borrow books either from the library or go to Barnes & Noble. I was spending money on books like there was no tomorrow. But I felt like I was investing in my career. I wanted to learn about other cultures, and I wanted to understand this HR field that I felt like I was just starting to scratch the surface of. Again, I didn't really have a lot of exposure to like, what's a COE model? what's HR operations. HRIS wasn't really a big thing back then. And so understanding the different pieces, and I'd spend time with my colleagues who sat in the other centers of excellence. So one of my colleagues who was in benefits and comp and ben and payroll. And I just said, tell me how this works. What do you do? What's the thought behind this? But all of it was married to the business. And again, I don't know where that came from, but for me, I was asking to go on sales calls. I remember my HR leader going, what, why? And I said, because I want to understand the business. I don't think I can help if I don't understand the business. And have the engineers take the pens, my cross pen. They would take the pens and I was like, oh, tell me how this works. Pull it apart. Show me how the technology works. Take me through the manufacturing floor. I loved being on the floor and seeing what people did because I felt like if I understood this, then I could help bring tools and HR techniques, processes, programs to the table. So I just took that with me everywhere I went. And again, I had really great not everywhere, but I had some great mentors and leaders who believed in me, and I was able to build relationships and have honest conversations with people. You both know me now, 3.5 years. What you see is what you get, right? There is no agenda here. I want the business to succeed, and I want to have an impact, and I want my team to have an impact, and the people around me to have an impact. That's all there is to it. There's no magic sauce.
Debra, thank you. And you're 100% right. Authenticity. That's like the word that I think of when I think of you. So it's cool to hear you put it to context here. I kind of always like to pause here and ask the question: at what point did you know that leading the overall HR function somewhere was what you wanted to do?
As soon as I got to AT Cross, my very first corporate role, because I was like, wow, I want to do that, and I want to do that, and I want to do that, and how do I learn that? And oh, that's really interesting. And seeing how all the pieces actually overlap and interlock, and how you can't have one without the other. And it was just this big puzzle, and we were so heavily reliant on each other, right? And it's sort of like an assembly line. I never really thought of it this way before, but it is, it starts with it's the employee life cycle. That's what it is. And I didn't know the terminology back then, but to me, I was like, oh, I want to touch all these pieces. And again, I think that goes back to just being a curious learner and really wanting to have an impact, the biggest impact I can, and wanting to try new things. Yeah. I think that's where it sort of hit me all at once. Like, oh, I want to do all of these things. How do I do that? Well, the only way to do that is to sit in all of these areas and then eventually.
So that's great, Debra. So that helps us kind of with the next kind of portion of the conversation. So at AT Cross, gonna make this decision. Hey, this is really cool. I'm really fascinated by how it works. I would love to lead it someday. Tell us kind of from there, like what that journey then looks like, and love to, kind of strategically how you were thinking about it, maybe why a move happened as a part of that grander picture. Like, give us all the fun stuff.
Sure. So, for me, again, it was about really aligning to the business. And I loved sitting in our executive sessions, even if I was just shadowing my boss, who was an amazing mentor and leader. And I learned so much from her, even as a writer, because she was legal counsel. And it was about understanding the strategic direction, right? Where are we going as a business, and how do we play into that? And it was just wanting to get more and more global in scope and trying different industries. So for me in my career, the decisions I made about going from one place to another were always about the next opportunity and having an impact at either a bigger organization. So from there, I went to Sensata Technologies, which was much, much larger in a completely different industry. I'll be honest, it was closer to home, and I was having children. And so that part was a little bit easier. And it was global in nature, and I could travel to APAC, and that was really exciting to me. As I said, different industry. And so it was about, again, sort of positioning yourself and putting yourself in places where you have the ability to take on more, right? No matter what you do, at the end of the day, there's only so much hierarchy in an organization, right? I always talk about your roles grow this way and this way. And that's true of HR too. It's true of myself. And so for me, the opportunities were about how do I grow and expand my breadth and knowledge of HR and get more and more exposure to best practices and the best ways of doing things and centers of excellence, and having more of those HR colleagues around you that you can also learn from. And so each of the steps I made was about that. And so then I went into life sciences and haven't really looked back since then. And I love being in a mission-driven organization. When I left or thought about leaving higher education, the struggle I had was, I know that I need to have an impact, and I know the mission needs to mean something to me. And so how could I find that in the quote unquote corporate world? Because life sciences, I didn't know it as an industry, I'm just being honest. I didn't think about like pharmaceuticals or big pharma or anything like that. And so being in life sciences, where it is so mission driven and so about impacting patients' lives, that to me is my home. I mean, I feel really blessed to have the opportunities to work at such great, several different life sciences organizations. But again, it's raising your hand, it's putting yourself out there, it's showing the business who you are as a business partner, right? I mean, you and I joked about this during one of our last BHRC sessions, where you said something in the session about data, and you're like, tell me more about that. And I said, well, I want to be careful because I don't want to insult anybody. But I said, it was this notion of HR is enabler of the business, right? So it is not our job to manage for you, but it is our job to help you manage, right? Managers need to manage. I say this all the time at work, but it's our job to help you manage. We are an enabler to the business, but we are part of the business. And that's the thing I struggle with, because so many people talk about HR as if it's this thing over here and it's separate from the business. It's not. We are the enterprise. We are the business, right? You can't have a business without the people. But we don't make all of the decisions, right? We get a bad rap. It's funny, I was thinking of this podcast. I ran into someone at the airport this week, and we were standing in the TSA line and we were talking about our careers. And he said, oh, what do you do? And I said, oh, I run HR for a life sciences company. And what do you do? I'm in sales. You know what his next sentence was to me? Oh, mean HR. I was like, okay, this could be an opportunity for me to be sarcastic or to be an educator. And I chose to be an educator. And I said, I'm curious. Why do you say that? And he said, well, because you're all about policies and saying no. And I said, can I share a piece of advice with you? And he said, yes. I said, if you did your job, I wouldn't have to be the hard ass HR person. And I said, businesses make decisions. We help enable those decisions. That's what we do.
Geez, I didn't think the stigma for salespeople was that much better, Debra.
I know. I started laughing. I should have guessed you were in sales, but I didn't want to generalize.
well, Debra, that's interesting, and it's funny, and I'm curious if you'll give me an answer this time, because you didn't 3 years ago on the spotlight, right? And so I asked you a question, and I said, hey, it's really cool. We chat with so many of your peers, and it always seems like that HR leaders, and really HR and people professionals broadly, everyone seems to have a HR superpower, right? And they've built out maybe other parts of the function to help support that. 3 years ago, you said, Sean, I'm an HR business partner. That's what I'll always be. That's who I am, and I believe you. But I'm here like doubling down, like. And I know that business partnering is part of the function, but if you had to pick one of the traditional HR and people function areas that is your specialty, which one would you pick? Or country?
Well, I'm not going to do traditional because I don't view myself as a traditional leader. So my superpower is I'm a translator. And I think that goes all the way back to my heritage, speaking different languages. It's about translating the business strategy to the people strategy and vice versa. It's about translating when a manager is frustrated and they want to take action, what's the best course of action? It's about translating when an employee is frustrated because they don't understand the business and objectives. How do we translate that? So I actually love this question now. I definitely was stumped the first time. But I think given our conversation today and looking at that picture of where my history began, I'm going to say translator. That is my superpower.
I love it. That's a great answer. And I promise you I'll never ask you the question again.
Let's see if I change it.
Well, Deb, this has been really cool. We got about 5 minutes left here on the episode. We always kind of pivot to the future. And, you know, you can think about the future regarding your role right now and looking ahead. You can think 5 years out. But the first question we always ask is, as you think about leading HR and people in the future, and let's talk about the future in a 1 to 3 year kind of thought process, what comes top of mind to you?
Workforce, the demographics of the workforce. And I don't mean from a DE&I perspective, though that is incredibly important. What I mean is this is the first time, and this came up in our session, this is the first time in our history that we have 4 different generations in the workforce. And this goes back to translating too. I think I'll be thinking about this for a long time now, Sean. We have different needs, different values, different propositional values for these generations. They learn differently. They want to work differently and in different places. So for me, it's about translating those needs, those values to the business and vice versa, right? Which is deliberately why I said I would not take a traditional answer when you asked me. I'm not a traditional HR person. I think that's something I'm very proud of. And I've said that to you when we first met. I love that about my career and who I am as a person. And so it is about looking at your demographics and truly understanding and asking. Don't make assumptions, right? We're sitting here. I'm 51 years old. I'm lucky that I have 7 children who can help me understand this new generation that's coming up, though I often need a translator from their text messages. That's a different conversation. But it's about really knowing your organization, getting the data, studying it, and then telling the story and help bringing solutions to the business or to our employees that resonate with them. Not this is a fabulous trend happening on TikTok, or this is what Wall Street is saying, or this is what the Department of Labor is saying. But how do you take all of that information from the macroeconomic workforce trends all the way down to what's happening in your business, translate that into a people strategy that resonates instead of doing it off the shelf? So for me, that is what I am thinking about. And that's everything. It's AI, it's DE&I, it's all the things that come into that. But you really have to understand your business. You can't copy and paste.
Thanks, Debra. And it doesn't seem like you thought about it that much. So I mean, we'll leave you to it. But no, I love that. And you're right. And it encapsulates everything, every part of the business, every part of the human, every part of the HR conversation is tied into that discussion and that consideration. So I love it. So last question. Someone has watched this or listened to this podcast and said, wow, that Debra Bruneau, she's really cool, not traditional, makes fun of Sean and Paul all the time, will never answer Sean's questions straightforward. I really want to be like Debra in corporate America someday. But geez, I'm in my senior year at Merrimack. I didn't study HR in college. What advice, Debra, do you have folks that are thinking about getting into HR and would love to have a great career there? Or maybe even folks inside an organization right now that are being told, hey, you'd be great in HR. What career advice do you give to them?
It's a great question. And as I mentioned, because my children are college age, I've spent some time at Merrimack recently talking to the students. Some of my kids' friends are interested in HR. What I will say to you is this is your journey. This is not about my journey. I can share my experiences, my successes. I want you to learn from my failures too. I'm still learning from them, but you have to do what's right for you. And so I always say, again, be authentic. Really try to understand what is it about this field, whether it's HR, marketing, business, finance, sales. Break it down. What are the responsibilities that really resonate with you? When you get up in the morning, what gets you excited? What are those tasks? Write them down so that you can start to formulate, oh, this is why HR, this is why marketing. And the other thing is don't lock yourself in. I work with people for 20 plus years, and I've seen people go in and out of different careers. So when you are 18 trying to figure out your life, or 40 trying to figure out your life, just know it's still evolving. The decision you make today does not have to be the decision that you've made for the rest of your life. You can pivot. That's the great thing about being human. That's the great thing about corporate America, or even nonprofits, because I sit on plenty of boards. You can pivot. You can tell your own story. You can craft who you want to be. So try not to label yourself. Don't label others. The world is vast, and just apply, take risks, believe in yourself, and learn every step of the way from the successes and the failures.
You might be giving the commencement speech at Merrimack this weekend.
That's awesome, Debra. Well, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast. This was a long time coming. Love hearing your story. I knew about 75% of it. The other 25% is just as amazing, if not amazing, if not more amazing. But thanks for joining us. Thanks for being a great BHRCer.
Thanks for having me.